Now, we don't take any options off the table in terms of how we operate with Iran. But what you can expect is that we will continue to apply the sorts of pressure that will have a direct impact on the Iranian government until it makes a better choice in terms of how it's going to interact with the rest of the international community.
Earlier this week, you will recall that the Justice Department announced they had stopped this mustachioed man, Mansour Arbabziar, a dual Iranian-American citizen, from hiring someone he thought was a member of a Mexican drug cartel to assassinate Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States. What? Yes. The key here is that according to the Justice Department, this guy was not a rogue element. He was not acting alone. He was plotting this Washington, D.C. assassination at the request of the highest levels of the Iranian regime. If this is true, the stakes are now very high over this. Haven't had enough of war with Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen? Want war with Iran, too? New York Republican Congressman Peter King, head of the Homeland Security Committee, did go ahead and call this plot an act of war by Iran. Democrat Carl Levin, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, basically agreed, saying it may be, adding he'd want to see what the implications of that characterization are before I use it. The U.S. is now taking its case against Iran to the UN Security Council, which could authorize new sanctions against Iran. They could even authorize the use of force against Iran. The Justice Department says this plot was hatched by a shadowy, elite part of the Iranian military that's called the Quds Force. But lots of people have come out this week questioning that assertion, saying that this bungled, poorly planned screw-up of an assassination where the dude thought he was dealing with a drug cartel and he's really dealing with an American government informant, this is screwed up enough that it doesn't sound like the Quds Force, because they're supposedly pretty good at this kind of thing. To those skeptics, U.S. officials have essentially said, we so know that it was the Quds Force, we know for sure, but you're going to have to take our word for it. The truth is we do not know that much about the Quds Force. Experts estimate that it's a 15,000-member group, that they're recruited from the top ranks of the Iranian military, and that their role is to, quote, clandestinely exert military, political, and economic power to advance Iranian national interests abroad. Clandestinely exerting military, political, and economic power to advance national interests abroad. Sound like anyone we know? Hello, shadow military organization that conducts secret missions around the world meant to further the interest of the country it serves, whose actions are often denied by the government? We have one of those. This story is tricky to even talk about because there is so much secrecy, so much opacity, so many unknown unknowns. On one side, we have this Iranian military branch, part of the even more secretive Iranian regime. On the other side, we have the U.S. government that says, we know for sure the Iranian regime is behind all of this. Trust us on it. Plus, the U.S. has the added problem that some of the charges we are lobbying against the Quds Force, secret acts of war in other countries, we do those things too, which makes it harder to convince the rest of the world to be outraged by Iran's outrageous behavior. The CIA is currently engaged in a war in Pakistan, for example, a war that is being conducted with drones, a war that is, for all intents and purposes, secret. There's no oversight. There are no reporters embedded with the CIA. Politicians do not answer questions about what the CIA does. This is a war that is happening with no one officially watching. Maybe this is just the future of war, underground war waged by Iran, waged by the United States, waged by other countries who have figured out that it is easier and more convenient and less hassle, frankly, to go to war without telling anybody that you're doing it. Joining us now is Steve Clemons from the New America Foundation. You can find him online at the Washington Note and at the Atlantic magazine, where he's now Washington editor-at-large, and they're really lucky to have him. Steve, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, good to be with you, Rachel.
How do you get to the bottom of a story like this Iran story? How are you confident that you're telling a story that's real and not spin?
Well, I think the bottom gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's just part of the process of this. The United States lost a lot of its eyes and ears some years ago. You want to see, a bungled case. Jim Risen, a New York Times national security correspondent, in a book called State of War, which somewhat outed that warrantless wiretap story, but it also told a fascinating story of how the CIA accidentally revealed and sent an electronic message where most of our Iranian-based intelligence assets were revealed. And that entire intelligence network inside Iran was rolled up. So when you talk about opacity, some of that opacity was self-inflicted by the United States, which at one point did have an extensive intelligence network. So the issue of how do you get deep, it's very, very hard. The administration is saying, trust us. But after the WMD case in Iraq, after so many cases in which, particularly during the Bush administration, we had outright lies told to the American people, there's not a lot of trust of government when the president comes out and says, we know that this leads right up to the very highest levels of the Al-Quds force.
In the overall relationship of political accountability and military force, there was a remarkable development today separate from the Iran situation. President Obama today sent a letter to Congress telling them that, past tense, he has ordered 100 U.S. combat troops to 4 countries in Central Africa to fight the Lord's Resistance Army. The letter says these will be combat-ready troops, but they'll just be doing training, not actual fighting themselves. Did we have any idea this was coming, Steve, or is this relatively out of the blue?
This is semi out of the blue. General Carter Ham, who's the commander of the African Command, about 10 days ago at CSIS in Washington, began to telegraph that we needed this capacity to send advisors in to help deal with the various national militaries that were dealing with growing, mostly violent Islamic groups inside deep Africa, Sudan, Somalia, Uganda, the Congo, and these areas. And when he first made these statements, they sort of went without any public notice, no news release about them, until the president essentially notified Congress that he had done this. And it's now raised this whole question of, this is how wars and deeper engagements start, is advisors go in. I imagine that you're going to begin doing a lot more shows on what's really happening in deep Africa now, which is not something many of us have been talking about.
How significant is it that the president sent these troops first and notified Congress after? How much leeway does he have to do that without even consulting Congress about this?
Well, the way the War Powers Act works is the president needs to notify Congress within 48 hours of deployment of force, which holds. Within 60 days, there has got to be larger action. Congress has to approve this action, and then he's got 30 days to withdraw. There have been suggestions that the War Powers Act just is either unconstitutional or doesn't in effect work, and that there needs to be much more of a consultative process back and forth. But right now in this political climate, I think that the administration is trying to live somewhat by the letter of the law, but not necessarily by the spirit, which is to basically draw in senior levels of the intelligence committees and the various armed services committees and begin having a conversation about why this is a matter of grave national interest to the United States, that you would deploy so many combat-ready troops that they say are not necessarily going to be in combat, but they are combat troops that have been deployed.
Steve Clemens of the Washington Note and the New America Foundation, also Washington editor-at-large for Atlantic Magazine. You just brought so many different parts of information about this to this discussion. I'm incredibly grateful, Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, starring in the best new thing in the world today?
Bang.
Not Clyde the orangutan. He's not in best new thing in the world. But rather Clint Eastwood coming up. Best new thing at the end of the show.